All right, we are back here on the Justin and Suffering podcast, getting ready for the college football season. Joining me today, our big college football guest. He covers college football with Sporting News. Bill Bender is back with us. Bill, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Before we get to this on the field stuff, I feel like the big domino everybody's sort of talking about now is this news that came out last month that USC and UCLA are abandoning the Pac-12, moving to the Big Ten. Like, what's your take on this move as really just reshaping the entire landscape of college football?
Well, everybody's got a take, but it's definitely made the Big Ten a coast-to-coast conference. Increases visibility, increases TV money. A lot of, as everybody knows, these moves are being generated by TV money and the future of the playoff and those kind of things. So it's weird, somebody who grew up in Ohio and didn't really like USC as a kid, but it's neat because you're going to get to see USC play Ohio State, UCLA play Michigan, and Nebraska play USC. I think it's going to be cool.
I think it'll be cool too. It's one of those things that just like football and basketball do drive the bus here. It just feel weird though saying it. I guess it's great for this. It'll be weird seeing like the volleyball game between like Rutgers and USC. That's good. Especially weird. That's weird to see. I feel like it's just the cost of doing business these days.
Well, people are. I think they're going to have enough money to do all that stuff, though. When the TV money numbers are astronomical, absurd. I can't come up with a word to describe how much money it is. So I think they're going to make out on that, and it will help. Like if you're in USC shoes, of course you take the money. It's a dramatic increase of what you would make from staying in the Pac-12. So it does test the traditions of college football. It tests whether or not it's a regional sport anymore. But I keep telling people, sure, college football is regional. That's great. It's being dominated by one region.
Yep.
And that's the difference with what the Big Ten did with this move.
Yeah. Plus, I think it's also if USC, UCLA, and like you're in a conference right now that has had trouble getting into the playoff, moving to the Big Ten theoretically would increase your chance of getting to the playoff if you have a good team.
Yeah, the Pac-12 hadn't had a playoff team since 16. They, Oregon obviously made it in 14 and won a game. But, yeah, from a visibility standpoint, it's not always fair for the Pac-12. They can't change what time the sun sets on the Eastern time zone. Because there are guys like us, right, that are going to stay up and watch those games. But the fact of the matter is a large portion of college football fans aren't staying up for that 10 o'clock game between Oregon and Washington State. They'll watch the huge games in the Pac-12, but they're not watching those. And this is a way for USC, UCLA, and if other teams from the Pac-12 end up joining the Big Ten, for them to increase their visibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And right now, we feel like we're kind of in this period where we're sort of waiting for this next domino to fall. I don't know where it's going to be, whether it's some teams joining the Big 12, the Big 10 expanding further here. Like, what do you think could happen next year with some of these teams that got left in the dust?
Well, we're going to find out. I think that's eventually there will be casualties. And that's the unfortunate thing is that if there is super conferences and if there is another round of realignment, then they're going to change that. It's going to hurt some schools. It's going to hurt the Washington States and the Oregon States that might not have a chair when it's all over. And that's the difference between college football and the NFL. Is college football has those places that may not necessarily have huge viewership or huge national appeal, but I've been to Morgantown and I've been to, NC State at a game at Raleigh and how amazing it is. So I think that's something that could be the casualty of all this realignment stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Let's get some of the on-field stuff here. And obviously, last year was a big year for Georgia. They broke through. They won their first national championship under Kirby Smart. And what do you think their chances are here of pulling off a repeat?
They're right there. They're going to be good. We're going to find out if they can withstand losing as many guys to the NFL as they did. Never easy when you lose, I think it was 15 guys to the NFL draft, especially on the defensive side. It's a little bit different than LSU, who most of the guys they lost to the NFL a couple years ago were part of arguably the greatest offense of all time. So I still think Georgia's got a chance. If I was ranking the true heavyweights, they're probably a step behind. Alabama and Ohio State just because of what those schools have coming back.
Yeah, that's really fair. And speaking of Alabama, I feel like they've been right where they usually are. They're right near the top of the polls here. Disappointing finish in the title game last year. I feel like Nick Saban's definitely motivated to try and get another title here. What do you expect out of the Crimson Tide this year?
Oh, they're going to be really good. I mean, that's real breaking news there, I guess. But I mean, when you have the returning Heisman Trophy winner in Bryce Young, and who didn't miss a beat from Mac Jones last year, receiver. I mean, they had an injury at the position this week, but still deep enough there. They're going. I think Jahmyr Gibbs will be a breakout star. He's already that at Georgia Tech, but I think he's going to be in a lot more living rooms now, and people are going to realize how good he is. And then defense around Will Anderson, Dallas Turner, loaded secondary. I think they have 10 guys in our top 50 NFL draft pick board for next year. So, they're going to be hard to beat. When Nick Saban said it was a rebuilding year, the crazy thing about it, no matter how many times you roll your eyes, is he's probably right.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy to think about here. And the SEC, obviously, the dominant conference in college football. That's even before Oklahoma and Texas come in a few years here. Who can actually push those top two, in your opinion, outside Alabama and Georgia?
In the SEC?
Yeah.
I mean, A&M maybe. That's a great question because who the third best team in the SEC is a fairly wide open debate. It's one of those things where, man, there's a lot of good teams and a lot of good teams that that I just don't know if it's Arkansas or A&M in the West. Is it Tennessee or Kentucky in the East? Where does South Carolina fit in? I mean, they've got Spencer Rattler now. I mean, that's what probably the exciting part of the SEC race is, trying to figure out who's going to finish second in each of those divisions. Because I think it's going to be tough for any of those teams to catch a Georgia or an Alabama. I mean, Georgia and Alabama could lose a game. They could lose a game, but I just don't see them losing multiple games within the conference.
I think the interesting thing for me is, like, if Georgia or Alabama loses to one of those teams that you mentioned, the second tier there, and they manage to run the table otherwise, then you could basically have somebody get in the title game you're not expecting.
Well, that's what A&M couldn't do last year. They pulled off the upset, right? But they couldn't, advance that upset. And Georgia lost to South Carolina a couple years ago. I remember it was on my 40th birthday, and I remember the shock value of it, but it's like, okay, can somebody else do that? And that's what makes it so hard. I mean, you like I said, I mean, Alabama and Georgia, the fact that there hasn't been an SEC championship game with both teams undefeated since Tebow versus Florida, or versus Alabama in 2009, tells you how hard it is. But the depth, the recruiting, the talent those teams have, I don't see either one of them losing twice.
Yeah, for sure. Let's go to the Big Ten for a minute. Obviously, Ohio State's the more highly ranked team. They did not make the playoff last year, and Michigan did. Michigan has a lot of talent back. Ohio State's the slight edge on top here. Would you rank it that way? Ohio State's the slight favorite to win the Big Ten?
I actually think they're kind of more than a slight favorite just because of the offensive talent. And I think, but you make a good point. It's almost like Michigan, people forget they won the Big Ten, and they've got some talent back on the offensive side. And, it's going to be tough for them to replace David Ojabo and Aiden Hutchinson, but they're still going to be pretty good. And their schedule is soft enough early in the season that I think by October, when they finally start getting in a couple real fist fights, they'll be pretty good. So I think the Wolverines are going to be a little bit better than people think.
Yeah, for sure. And let's sort of go with the same question here from the Big Ten. Like, who we feel is that sort of that third team in the Big Ten that could really give these two a push, a challenge?
I mean, Wisconsin in the West, and then I don't think Michigan State's going anywhere because Mel Tucker, he's done a good job with the transfer portal, got an experienced quarterback. Some guys stayed back, and they worked the portal again. I mean, they do have to replace Kenneth Walker, and that's not going to be easy because he was special at the running back position. But they're not going anywhere. And if you talk to some of their players at Big Ten Media Day, Xavier Henderson, for example, he said, yes, Ohio State was better than us, but I don't think they were 49-0 at halftime better than us. So, I mean, that's going to be the big hurdle for them. Can they keep that rivalry going with Michigan, which they've won the last 2 years, and then can they take that next step, maybe go give the Buckeyes something when Ohio State comes to East Lansing this time? The last two with the the Buckeyes have not been particularly close.
Yeah, that's certainly true. And go to the ACC for me because obviously last year, surprising year, Pitt ends up winning the ACC largely because Clemson had its worst year in a long time under Dabo Swinney here. I mean, the polls seem to be very high on the Tigers, and they're going to bounce back here. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I do. I think, with the defense they got coming back, Brian Bursey, a couple other really good players on that side of the ball, Trenton Simpson. They'll be good. And it comes down to quarterback play. DJ Youngwungalele and Cade Klubnik, if he comes in and gets some reps, they need that to be better. I mean, their defense is going to be elite. And, the good news is we get to see that on Labor Day night, where most people get to watch and see and really take in whether or not that team is any different.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously one team I'm got my eye on here is Notre Dame because I remember all the craziness last year at the end when the coach left and Marcus Freeman took over, and Notre Dame has a lot of talent coming in here. I think they're fifth in the coaches poll right now, and a lot of the players are excited about Marcus Freeman. How do you think that the Irish do this year?
They're going to be good. It's not an easy schedule, though. When you open against at Ohio State, they play BYU in Las Vegas. They play Clemson at home. And then at the end of the year, they're playing USC, who I'm sure we'll talk about as well. But, that's a loaded schedule. So if Notre Dame goes 11-1 with that schedule, there shouldn't be too many people running around saying, hey, this isn't a playoff team, because that's a playoff schedule. So, but it's not going to be easy, especially in that opener. And, for Marcus Freeman, he has done a fantastic job recruiting, and they're going to have to figure out quarterback for this first game, whether it's Buchner or Pine. I think it'll be Buchner. And anxious to see how he rubs off on that defense and how improved their linebackers will be good, because they're going to be coached as good as anybody with Marcus Freeman, with James Laurinaitis, with Al Golden, the new defensive coordinator. So they should be pretty good up front.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously, we talk about a lot of teams we think are going to be in the mix for the college football playoff. A lot of teams in the Big Ten, SEC, Clemson. I feel like we have not talked about the Big 12 or the Pac-12 game. Which league do you think is more likely to produce a team that can contend for the playoff?
I still think the Big 12. Because even though the problem with that is they've got 5 teams that are pretty even, so you're wondering, how that could be the most competitive league. But is it good enough to produce a playoff team? So that's something to keep in mind with them. Oklahoma be pretty good. I think Baylor lost a lot of skill guys, but they're going to be good up front. Texas has got a ton of talent, but we do the Texas thing every year. They play Alabama early, so we'll know what they're really about. And then even down to Oklahoma State and Kansas State, those teams are definitely capable of winning that conference.
Yeah, absolutely here. And do you have a potential sleeper right now you're wise to say that this team plays well, they could sneak into the playoff if somebody stumbles among these contenders that we're watching already?
A lot of people are on NC State and, those type of, like a team like that. I think for me, it's probably Utah. They're not really a end team, but to be a sleeper, you really 6 through 10 is your sleepers anymore, because that top 4 is so hard to break through. I think if Utah beats Florida, if Utah get through the Pac-12 with 1 or less loss and build on what we saw in the Rose Bowl, they showed they could play with Ohio State. They just couldn't stop them. So they can build on those things. Yeah, Utah's a team that definitely has my attention, especially going into week 1, because they're a favorite at Florida. They're favored to win the game. So that's a really big game for the Pac-12.
Yeah, it absolutely is here. And I think, obviously, one thing I want to watch, everybody's watching here, is the Heisman situation here. And obviously, unusually have the reigning Heisman Trophy winner back, because Bryce Young is back for another year at Alabama here. Is he the favorite to repeat? You think there's somebody else that can challenge him here for this award?
It's hard to repeat. It hadn't happened. It's only happened once. Archie's the only one to do it, and back in the 70s. And that's why I think it's almost like C.J. Stroud's the favorite. Because one, there's the way the Heisman works sometimes is we get tired of one guy and we move on to the next one. There's guys on Alabama's team that could also win the Heisman, whether it's Will Anderson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Jackson Smith-Jigba at Ohio State's one that I kind of like, because I think he's going to have a ridiculous year at receiver. But yeah, so I think if you look at all those things, but Bryce Young could absolutely still win it. He's going to have great numbers. He's going to be on the best team in college football. They could go 13-0. And be kind of cool to see somebody win too.
It would be pretty cool. Something we really haven't seen lately. My last question is this, because obviously we know the conference games really when the season gets going here, but I feel like college football teams have done better of late scheduling these marquee non-conference games early this season. What are a couple that you have circled on your calendar saying, I have to make sure I watch these games?
I mean, Ohio State, Notre Dame's huge. But outside of the easy ones to say, like Ohio State, Notre Dame, Alabama, Texas are obvious. Everybody's going to be watching those games. But I mentioned Florida, Utah. I think even like Arkansas, Cincinnati in week one's a fun game because Cincinnati's one coming off the playoff appearance and Arkansas is trying to break through and be kind of that it team in the SEC West with Sam Pittman. So, I mean, those are a couple that stand out. I mean, and then you get into, it's later, but it's in November, but Clemson, Notre Dame will be good at Notre Dame. I mean, that'll be another big stage game for the Irish, big one for Clemson. We all know what happened when they played there last year. And, kind of a big game for the ACC as they continue to sell their brand and kind of brings their conversation full circle as they try to keep up with the Big Ten and the Pac or the SEC, because that'll be a big night for their brand.
It's certainly be a big night for their brand, Bill. Thanks all the time. I really appreciate it. Before I let you go, how can people follow what you on social media, keep up with your coverage of college football for Sporting News?
Yeah, I'm at Bill Bender 92 at sportingnews.com, and we'll be turning them out. I mean, it's that time of year, so we've got plenty of content over there and having a lot of fun doing it.
Absolutely, Bill. Thanks all the time. Really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate it.